Okay, welcome to the first meeting of the W3C Technical Working Group, looking at the membership proposal for the 4th of November, 2021. I'm just going to go around and ask people to introduce themselves. First of all, Nick Evans.
Hello, Nick Evans from IMIN.
Nathan Salter.
Hi, I'm the lead developer for BookTech and PlateFinder.
Rob Redpath.
I'm part of Open Data Services Cooperative, supporting the OpenActive W3C community group.
Thank you. Matthew Davis.
Matthew Davies from Sports, working with We Play Football to implement the OpenActive booking functionality, specifically with interest in the MCR Active project.
Okay, thank you. And sorry, yes, Davies, not Davis. And finally, penultimately, Andy Gordon.
Afternoon, Andy Gordon from Gladstone, Senior Product Owner here, working on behalf of everyone active in the Manchester and Westminster OpenActive projects.
Fantastic, thank you. Debbie Giordano.
Debbie Giordano, everyone active.
And finally, Wayne Granger coming in just at the wrong moment to be asked to introduce himself.
Curtis, to get away with it. So Wayne Granger, Product Manager for Legend, part of the Explore group.
Okay, thank you very much. I will just share my screen here. Get the slides up here. So is everyone seeing the slides now? Great.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll be going through the membership proposal in some amount of detail. And as I think it was Nick suggested on the last W3C call, it's really about taking, going through the relevant appendices at the same time as looking at the higher level sections that begin the document. But before, I thought we'd start with famously the hardest problem in computer science, which is what to call things. As we started talking on the last W3C call about just some of the terminology of the document of the proposal itself. And we made less progress on that than I had hoped. But I think it's actually a useful conversation to have just to clarify that we're all talking about the same thing. I don't know if we can, I think we should try to arrive at consensus here. We might need to consult with other stakeholders before finalizing this, but if we could get an unambiguous form of words for some core concepts in the document, I think that would be helpful. So the first one is actually in the title of the proposal itself. So membership, there's a kind of persistent circling around membership on the broker versus membership on the booking system. I think where we landed at is customer account on the booking system. That refers to the records held for an individual on the booking system. On the broker, would it make sense to keep a membership as a broker specific term and customer account referring to booking systems? Would that disambiguate sufficiently?
I'd be supportive of just calling it customer account in both cases, because the model's the same. We can reuse models. I think if we try and create an artificial distinction, we'll have a complication in the model, because we really want to just have it. But if we can model the customer account, we can use that in different contexts.
I guess it's about, so I mean, certainly at the level of, what you call the actual classes, that makes sense. But in terms of the document, like when we're describing things like the flow of, you log into the broker and then you connect to a customer account on the booking system. I feel like we got into trouble when we initially, in that both of those things were referred to as memberships, and we had sort of multiple conversations that kind of went like, are you talking about membership here or membership there? And then we sort of would spiral a little bit around that. I'm just worried that if we retain customer account in the documentation or as a definition, we need to have some way to disambiguate each and every time that term is used about which particular piece we're talking about. So we could say broker customer account and booking system customer account, every time. It feels a little cumbrous, but is that just the only way forward?
I think this is Andy from Gladstone. I think the one thing to maybe just be clear, membership is as a subsequence of a record being added. As I understand it, there's a record being added within the broker, which then is either added again or it's shared and passed through to the booking system. Membership is a consequence of passing the details through to the booking system and then attributed to that record, if that makes sense. So I think membership overall is part of the process. I think if you strip it back a little bit more, there's not as much ambiguity, but maybe confirmation. What's being held and recorded at the broker versus through this specification, what's in the minimum or the full scope could be passed through to the booking system. Does that make sense?
I see what you mean. So you're saying that essentially membership is the description of everything as a whole, like the whole process.
Well, not even that. No, the actual membership as such is, against the phrase that Nick's been using, that's in the specification, is the entitlement, the package, the add-on, what benefits you get. What we're saying though is that there are details, as I understand it, that have been recorded within the broker: first name, last name, email, dates of birth, or whatever. Again, that needs to be clarified. But as part of that sign up within the broker, they also select a form of package, membership, entitlement. And it's then, if that's held in the broker, that can be confirmed what's being held in the broker, now, whether that be Manchester, whether it be Westminster or somebody else as this goes forward. And then what is being proposed to be passed through as the minimum through to the possibility of what could be encompassed being passed through to the booking system. But the entitlement, the membership, the package is something that's attributed to the details that are added to when that person first signs up.
So I guess they're saying another way it might be that those details are called the customer account, and the customer account has a membership or a package or a entitlement associated with it. So it
has a consequence to them why they're signing up to Manchester or to Westminster. It's what benefit they get. That's the membership.
Yes. So from a customer point of view, it's the reason they're going through this whole journey in the first place is to get that benefit. From the kind of, I guess, the modeling point of view, there are two things. There's the customer account, which exists with or without an entitlement or package, and there's the entitlement or package itself, which is linked to that account.
Yeah.
So I guess to disambiguate between the customer account on the booking system and the broker, we could potentially use linked account for a broker and then customer account for booking system.
Well, I mean, there is an element that the person who's signing up at Manchester or Westminster may already be a record that's already within the booking system.
Well, yes, that's exactly the flow that we're talking about.
Well, there's two parts to it. There's somebody who is unknown to the booking system. That's one element. And then there's another element whereby there's somebody who is on the booking system, but as I understand it, they've still got to sign up within the Manchester or Westminster portal to say that they're record, and then those two get linked up. So I correct me if I'm wrong here, Nick. There's two parts to it, and also a third, which is the non-member, the guest, who isn't registered at all, I presume. But that's a separate piece, I think, to what we're looking at here. There's either somebody who is unknown to the booking system entirely, and the other one that you're mentioning there, Nathan, is somebody who is already in the booking system, but the two records need to link up.
Yeah, that's right. So it sounds like there's the actual model underneath, which is the customer account, and there's one on the broker and one on the booking system. And then there's the different processes, which are either creating or linking or guest. And those processes may create on a customer account where it didn't exist, or may just link an account where it does exist, or in the guest case, doesn't even need an account.
Yeah, I mean, the final state that will be arrived at the end of a flow will be, call it a customer account on the broker, a customer account on, or some number of customer accounts, one or more customer accounts on the booking system, and the ability to communicate between those two, with the customer accounts on the booking system being linked to packages. that's where we get to at the end of that flow.
So I guess like my question here is, we're saying a lot about what the broker's doing or not doing with that customer account. Does that need to even be specified? I mean, do we need to, are we over engineering it to try and even consider that really as part of this? Because from this,
I think Nick is probably, maybe not here, but maybe at a different session. I think it would be good to have an understanding. I mean, I'm not speaking on behalf of Everyone Active as an example, or maybe even Greenwich themselves. I don't think Everyone Active are actually seen a journey of what's being proposed or what's actually there at the moment within the Manchester portal or Westminster portal. So they can't visualize what it is, the journey they're going through as a user journey to ultimately come through to the booking system.
We do have some sort of simple wireframes actually in the membership proposal. Would it?
I think the wireframe, Tim, is great, but I think from our client's perspective, actually seeing the journey, because ultimately at the end of the day, these customers, wherever they come from, will end up at a desk within InCenter. And I don't think our client as such at the moment has a true picture of the full end-to-end how it's going to be. And if there's any issues, it's the in-center reception staff that have to deal with them, and they're completely alien to what's gone on before.
Okay.
I can take an action if it's helpful, Tim, to check with Stephen if he'd be comfortable to share the GLL kind of working, GLL MCR working thing on the next call. If that's going to give us some clarity.
Yeah, I think so. I'm just wondering which call that should go in, because that feels like a high level concern, useful for technical people to see, but probably of more interest to stakeholders who maybe aren't developers.
Yeah. Do on the Wednesday call.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you could check that with Stephen, that would be great. Yeah. Because I think
and Wayne, but I'll ask Wayne offline of this call in case he has a concern. Rather bring on the spot.
Okay.
Assuming that everyone's happy with that.
Okay. I think we've wandered a little bit from the simply the naming question. I guess the point you raised, Nick, was, do we even really need to talk about the broker? Or could we just talk about the booking system, in fact?
Yeah, I just wonder whether we don't even need to, the models might be used by the broker, but they don't need to follow any specific standard to do that. They can, as with brokers, as they currently manipulate open data, they can do what they want almost when they get the data.
Yeah, I think that's a reasonable suggestion, just because we don't necessarily need to define what the broker does with the customer details.
I think it is useful to refer to it in the documentation, as in, Tim, you said earlier on, it feels clunky to have to say, broker customer account and booking system customer account. I don't think there's a way around that clunkiness, because they are basically the same sort of concept, and however they model them is up to them, but they're the same concept, and so you're going to have to clarify which one you're talking about every time.
Yeah, I suppose it gets, and this is, I think, something we run into in booking a few times. I think we do run into problems where you're using the same model, but in fact, in two different contexts, very different parts, or a very small subset of the model gets used in one area, and a very full representation is used in another. So I think it can be difficult to communicate that the two models are doing quite different things or behave quite differently in different contexts. But
again, but as you said, like, it's not necessary to actually flesh out what the model looks like in each of those systems, but the concept is the same. In the same way as, like, referring to a user and separate subdomains of the system might have completely different meanings in the sales system versus the delivery system, but it's the same concept across the board. So it's almost it's useful to have Nathan on the call, I think, and it would almost be nice to have somebody from MCR Active to be able to say, when we're talking about this stuff, we say blah, because that is essentially the to try and represent the ubiquitous language across the from the business people through to the specs. useful to know what they talk about. So from Nathan's point of view, as kind of on the broker side of Playfinder, what do they talk about?
Yeah, I guess when we're trying to distinguish between customers in BookTech and customers in Playfinder, we do just say Playfinder customers and BookTech customers.
Okay, I guess maybe then let's keep customer account then, as Matthew suggested, and possibly raise this in the Wednesday W3C call just to canvas that a little bit more widely with people who are more concerned with higher level concepts. But for the moment, we can keep customer account, with the notion that actually we talk much more about the booking system. We refer to the broker as a necessary part of the system, but we don't necessarily, we can avoid confusion simply by minimizing discussion of what really is outside the specification. Okay. The next point on there is entitlements and subscriptions. And I think packages was also raised as conveying that same kind of list of things to which somebody is entitled as a function of the particular sort of customer account that they have. I think it would be good.
I had some reflection on this from the last call, because I think we did talk about entitlements and entitlements being used for a few different things. I do wonder though whether package is a good word. I wonder whether package is kind of, I don't know, it seems to imply other things as well in other domains. And I guess entitlements does too, but yeah, I just wonder whether, I think part of the reason we were thinking entitlement might not work is because it is being used in systems to mean something slightly different already. Mm-hmm. But that's kind of the case already with words like contact, and so I wonder whether, yeah, we had this a bit with kind of facility use and session. You know, session's a classic, right? What does session mean? And everyone's got a different definition of what a session is. And every system models that differently as well. Obviously, OpenActive ended up standardizing session as a particular thing, session series and scheduled session. So yeah, I just don't know whether, whether package is, because if you think about package holidays, for example, there's like a kind of broader implication about that. It's not just a thing that you, like an entitlement is something that you're entitled to, it's a thing that's assigned to a thing, whereas a package is something a bit more, you know, it feels like it's got more stuff going on in it. So I don't know, it was just a reflection that I wonder whether, and subscriptions also applies a recurrence of payment if you've subscribed to something. And that's the challenge when these are often free in this use case. I mean, they're almost exclusively free. So I don't know, but then I was part of the original entitlements discussion, so that just might be my bias from that back when I think Eugene coined the phrase from a similar conversation, or not coined it, but you know, suggested it. So yeah, I don't know.
I think I agree with you that subscriptions is a bad term, just because it's got too many other connotations. As for package/packages, I think you're right. It kind of indicates like a group of something, whereas if we're talking about a singular thing that we want to pluralize, then package probably isn't the right word. Obviously, like entitlements has got specific meanings in specific systems, but I mean, just speaking from our perspective, we don't actually have any concept of entitlements, so that's not going to be a problem for us. But another possible word that we could also borrow from insurance is benefits.
It's all going around the same thing though, isn't it, really? I mean,
yeah, it has exactly the same problem as entitlements.
It's got different phrasing depending on different systems and different industries in which you're actually serving here.
And ultimately, I think as much as the term that's chosen, on which I have no opinion, the way that it's used and the context it's used in are probably quite important. Like there's an awful lot of very technical terminology that we use on building software, building systems that actually no one outside of the developers working on it ever hears, and that's a good thing. It's the sort of encapsulation from object orientation world. It's, yeah, there's a bunch of internals that map onto business concepts, but every time in any implementation, you map from your internal concepts and what you call stuff to what the language that you're speaking with the outside world is, whether that's an open data standard or an API spec or whatever. And maybe they are the same words and you deal with the awkwardness. I think part of the reason this has been a difficult thing to talk about is that you're trying to agree, a bunch of businesses trying to agree on the same terminology for things when they all use these words already internally and not wanting to deal with the confusion. I think that that's something that we can kind of say, unless it's something that's clearly misleading in some way, which most of these probably aren't, they're kind of fine. And more important is how we agree to use this language and how we agree to represent it and work with it. Because it's quite a big thing for a business stakeholder to say, yes, I agree that you can use this word that means something else in my system. But if you can get into use the idea of mapping, then you're probably fine.
Yeah, I see what you mean. And I guess like as long as we don't think that using the word entitlements would restrict adoption, then I think it's a perfectly fine term.
So I think the confusion that entitlements raises for me, and this might be kind of an American context issue, in which case I'm happy to dismiss it as irrelevant, but I feel like the world that we're representing is one in which, and some of these assumptions could be wrong, we've got some booking systems which align rights, things to which you're entitled on the basis of some kind of membership. So you have the right to access the gym between 9 during its opening hours, and you can book various facilities on it. And there are certain prices associated with those facilities. And that's kind of a package or list of entitlements of things that you can do with it. And then on the other side, on the broker side, although this has to also be represented in the booking system, but and yeah, if there's discounts available in the booking system, they might be listed as 10, 15, 20%. They might have particular codes associated with them, but there's no sort of necessary connection between the features of the user and what those discount codes are. However, from the user's perspective or from the broker's perspective, somebody's a member of MCR Active by virtue of the fact that they reside in certain postcodes, and they might be entitled to an additional discount because they reside in a deprived postcode, or they have a disability or any number of other personal characteristics that give them the right to some kind of discount. And this is something that we also want to be able to talk about intelligibly, I think, separate from the list of price codes that are coming up in the offer on the booking system side. When I hear the word entitlement, and again, this might be an American thing, I hear about that second category of things to which you're entitled by virtue of your personal characteristics that are associated ultimately with your customer account, and which you have to demonstrate in order to be entitled to them, which is kind of different from the booking system side of things. Now, if this nest of concerns is just a nest of concerns in my own head, and my job is to forget about all of those things, that's fine. But if
Can I ask a point of clarity there, Tim? Just because what you're saying sounds exactly like my understanding of an entitlement in terms of the second part of that. When you say that the discounts, so the bit where you said entitlements to me sounds like blah, that blah is what I understood the entitlement we're talking about to be. When we're talking about the discounts in the offers, because the offers are linked to an entitlement, the offers aren't actually the entitlement themselves. There's like because you have this entitlement, you're entitled to this offer. And there's like you're entitled to this discount. So you're entitled to the discount because of your entitlement. The entitlement is not the discount itself. That's a separate thing. Is that?
Well, but yeah, I think the booking, there's some kind of series of steps that will have to be gone through by the user, the end user, to secure an entitlement. And there's a whole kind of modeling world that would be associated with that I assume has got something to do with the broker at some point. To be able to authenticate onto the MCR Active system or to make use of it, there will be some kind of series of steps you have to go through to assure that you possess these characteristics that entitle you to these discounts.
So yeah, this is why a demo from Andy's, as Andy said, would be really useful. So I mean, broadly what that looks like at the moment on the MCR, for example, or they all could look different, obviously, but in the MCR world, you're literally just saying, you know, I'm an adult, I'm this age, and I'm a resident
Yeah.
And therefore it comes up and says you're entitled to this, and that's the entitlement like line. You know, you are therefore a resident adult, blah.
Yeah.
And that's what's on your account. That's the same thing that's displayed in Legend and wherever else. And that's the kind of you're entitled to it because you qualify. And if you get a concession, then sometimes you have to actually supply a document to prove that entitlement that you're entitled to, and then that would then disappear from your account. If you say I'm a concession and then you don't supply the relevant documentation in a couple of weeks, that entitlement will then get removed. But where does that differ from? So that sounds like it aligns with the kind of entitlement concept we're talking about. So what's the?
Well, I suppose I'm thinking about it in terms of an open data feed, because I mean, really what that boils down to functionally in terms of the booking specification is what price you get back, right? That's the fundamental piece of data that relates to the entitlement.
So in the feed, as well as currently proposed, at least in the feed, there's like a link between offers and entitlements. It's like, this is the offer that relates to if you have this entitlement, use this offer. If you have this entitlement, use this offer, kind of thing.
Right, but there's not necessarily like a semantic link, like, you know, the entitlement, you know, it's going to be lining up codes ultimately, isn't it? I mean, you know that an entitlement from such and such a postcode and such an aid lines up to some particular code associated with an offer, right? That's how that communication would work.
I don't know if it's worth looking at in the appendices. There's an example of this in E3, which is where there's an eligible entitlement type. So it talks about eligibility. So an offer has an eligible entitlement type of, so page 39.
Getting there.
Yeah, so if you scroll down to the example, that might make it as a bit of that there. So here you can see that there's an offer. The first offer doesn't require any entitlement. That's just a normal adult as a guest who might be able to book. The second offer, this price is eligible for those who are not a very helpful example because the actual price is the same in the second offer, isn't it? So let's change that. So in the case of the second offer, that's only available to you if you have an eligible entitlement type from this list of eligible entitlement types.
Mm-hmm.
So you might have, you might be an MCR active adult resident, in which case you qualify for that that offer. So it's not I suppose so I was trying to convey there is it's not the offer itself, it's rather the thing that means that you qualify for the offer.
The thing that means that you qualify for the offer, those essentially are claims, aren't they? I mean, if we're talking at a technical level here, trying to define what the broker and the booking system should call it, is that not going a bit too far? And instead, these are simply claims. If you want to be eligible for this offer, then you must have this particular claim, that being you're under the age of 18 in this particular example, or you must be within this this postcode. That's a claim that whoever the identity provider is providing is able to assert is true for this particular customer account. So trying to decide whether it's called entitlement or package or membership or whatever, do we even need to choose a name for this thing? Or I suppose what I'm proposing the name for this thing is claims. Or is there another reason why we have to be talking about the thing which you have the eligibility for, giving you eligibility to offers? Is there a reason in the spec, in the communication between the broker and the booking system, where they pass back and forth this information about these things that give you an eligibility to these offers or not?
So there is a part later we'll come on to where you actually let's say that they're entitlements for just for the sake of the thing. If you can as a MCR active, as a broker, or indeed as a play finder, you can say this person has this entitlement. You just assert that because they're the source of kind of truth for whether they have that entitlement or not. And then that entitlement gets associated with the account on the booking system side, and can also be used by the broker to pull out bits from the open data feed accordingly, because they know that they've asserted it. And also, when they're displaying prices at the browse stage, which is what this is for, they can pull that out and go, great, I'll look at this one.
Okay, so then I guess my proposal is that instead of these being entitlements, they're claims.
So it's good. The only challenge with that language is because we're building on OpenID Connect, and claims is used heavily in OAuth and OpenID Connect to mean something slightly different.
What's the difference though? What is the difference?
A claim in OpenID Connect is a thing that you know about the identified person. So you know that their name, and so examples of claims include name, address, date of birth, those individual bits of information. So if we had a person object in here, then each property of the person object would be a claim in OpenID world. And in Schema, we'd call that property instead of claim. As a property of the person rather than the claim of the individual, and those two things. And in .NET, obviously, they've got claims as a whole. You can find claims, and you can search by the name of the claim, which is the same as searching by the name of the property within an object. And that's kind of I suppose, the mapping between those. And so there might be a challenge here, because if we talk about claims, that infers on the one hand, the claim could be the properties of the object, such as name, price currency. If we're also saying the claim is the object that this thing is, that could be, or rather, it's then more general, I suppose. We could call it the entitlement claim or something, which maybe.
Well, that's what I'm sort of hypothesizing on here. That the fact that a person has a certain entitlement is a claim. The fact that a person is under the age of 18 is a claim. The fact that they live in a particular set of postcodes is a claim. Yeah. And in order to gain eligibility to this particular offer, you must have this claim. This claim must be true, or the value of this particular claim must match this value in order for you to become eligible for this particular offer. As opposed to there being a new type of thing that we are essentially coming up with again. Not to say reinventing the wheel, but this is an issue that has been hit before. Are we just trying to rename claims?
Well, so I wonder whether we're talking about the different values of the claim rather than the claim itself. So for example, I'm not sure if it would be accurate here in the offers to say eligible. Well, I suppose you could say eligible entitlement claim instead of entitlement type or something. And then this is a potential claim that you would need to have.
The entitlement sort of implies that, for example, the being eligible for a particular price because you're under a specific age, you don't have to be assigned an entitlement in order to be eligible for that price. By virtue of the fact that you are under the age of 18, you are eligible for that offer. I don't think there would have to be any assignment that would take place in the booking system in order to, assign the entitlement of junior to a person. They have that, and they have that. That it is the case that they should be entitled to that offer by virtue of the fact that their date of birth is later than X.
So taking that example, if they're over 60, then they also need to supply documentation to prove that, which means that I guess the age, date of birth alone isn't enough to.
So yeah, I'm not disputing that there could be cases where additional validation documentation may be necessary in order to prove that you have that claim, but just that when the systems are talking, it's just, yes, they have this particular property about them. This particular account has this particular property, and how we've proven that, don't you worry about it. It's true. Therefore, they have an eligibility to that particular offer. Which kind of the only reason I'm suggesting is, can it therefore take away the question of how do we name this stuff? But again, I'm not as close to the current appendices, etc., to know whether if there's other places where it really does need to be passing information backwards and forwards about this stuff, and therefore we need to name it, because otherwise what are we calling the things that we're passing it backwards and forwards? I mean, I might argue that those be claims as well, but I'm not sure.
So I think it's maybe the question is tangibly whether eligible entitlement type here gets changed to a different name, and there's another place in terms of the kind of setting entitlements, which is further up in D7, which is like a call where you literally say, I'm going to give the entitlement. So we maybe is this something that we can? It's difficult. We're trying to talk names about things that we haven't.
So I'm going to
really covered the detail of yet. Is it? Oh no.
Yeah, I mean,
is it the case that it might be worth covering this when we get to D7 and entitlements? Because I know there's a specific entitlements part of this document which we'll cover.
And I think the reason I was naming, so just as an aside, I'll say, I'm certainly open to eligible entitlement type being renamed if it more accurately reflects the domain. That's fine. But I think the reason I was forefronting it was because it runs all the way through the documentation. So my concern was, and I think this kind of illustrates the problem, that if we call it an entitlement and we immediately dive into, well, how do we associate people with special prices? But when we're talking about package versus entitlement, what we're talking about there is actually, because anything to be represented in the system sort of has to be part of a package. Any offer is part of a package implicitly. And when we look here at entitlements, well, actually the default price is not associated with an entitlement type, right? That's the default. Everyone is entitled to it if they're on the system at all. And in the course of the document, in the course of actually just making the proposal, very basically, we have to have a name for this thing. The universe of possible things to which a customer account might be attached that is available to them. And I feel like another way of restating my difficulty with the idea of entitlement as something special about you that gets you a different rate from everyone else is that it doesn't, if we use entitlement to mean absolutely everything, we lose the force of that fact that entitlement is also a kind of subdomain of that range of offers, which is illustrated by its technical usage here, right? Where there's no entitlement for the regular price, even though if we use the language of packages, it would be quite clear that in fact, this is a package that are for people who are, generic, so to speak, and then this is another package for people who've got distinguishing characteristics that entitle them, so on and so forth. So in a way, I'm happy to use entitlement if it's not misleading, but I feel like the rabbit hole we just dived down maybe does indicate that it is a bit misleading that way.
I'm just trying to follow that. So if we said packet, whatever the names are.
I'm not. Yeah.
Are we saying that we would literally add another entitlement type to the offer?
Well, no, I think what I'm just saying is to refer to that domain of things to which access to the system grants you. Entitlement is maybe a potentially misleading word because it implies that actually you've got privileged access to some particular subgroup of that universe.
But you do. That's what I'm trying to understand.
Is that not true though? Because that is what I'm probably steering towards. Having an entitlement, having a package, it's influenced the level of pricing you're actually offered and what you can uptake if you can prove that entitlement or package.
Mm.
Right, but a bog standard offer does not have an entitlement type. So the implication would seem to be that an entitlement, I feel like naturally, if you looked at this document and you thought, oh, an entitlement, oh, well, these all have entitlement types. So entitlements are discounts, essentially, in terms of how the system talks about things. So what is that broader category of things to which you have access, but you do not have a specific discount, to which everyone who has access to the system is entitled. What is the universal entitlement?
But that would be a problem with package as well, wouldn't it? Because there is no universal package and there is no universal entitlement. It's a lack of package and a lack of entitlement that gives you it's almost a totally orthogonal thing. Like you're a guest, you can book as a guest. If you happen to be an account holder and you have an entitlement on that account, you can book according to the entitlements on your account. So
yeah, this might be a slightly skewed comment, but if somebody within the spec itself, prior to the membership and everything else as well coming through in this particular proposal, if you're a guest at that point, forget about membership. If though I came in, I proved that I was an in-borough or outer-borough and disability and that sort of thing, before it sounds like we're forcing people to register to get this entitlement. But if I was a guest and I didn't want to give you my details, but I in theory am entitled to that discount as an unnamed person, I've got my, I've got my bus pass or whatever the case may well be. Am I entitled to get a discounted price without actually you recording me on the database? Anyway?
Yeah, so currently the answer to that in the spec is yes. As a guest, you can book using an entitlement if you qualify for that entitlement, and the broker can manage that.
So in the appendices you've got there, then include entitlement pricing. I mean, we're not seeing that reflected for the guest in that spec, in that E3, I think it is, are we?
Sorry, you're right. I was oversimplifying with what. Yeah. So although a guest without any entitlements, you're right. Guest is the wrong thing to say, isn't it? It's someone without any entitlements. It doesn't actually matter whether they're a guest or not. Someone anyone can book the adult.
Someone's in the area, working in the area, doesn't want to give you the details. They'd like to utilize it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But we're saying the entitlement is also relevant to somebody who is unnamed as well.
Yeah, entitlement's relevant for both. Exactly. It's about whether they're entitled to it rather than.
Yeah.
What I wonder, Tim, is, and I know it'd be good to get this right up front, but because what the consequence of this conversation will be a find replace across the document, and then we can kind of go through and carry on. I just wonder whether is it worth us, because the thing is, when we've gone through the document, we're all going to have a much better understanding collectively about the implications of what an entitlement is and isn't, and things like this. And because we're having to jump around different parts of the doc right now to kind of have that conversation without actually getting into, for example, this appendices, which is obviously much later.
I mean, I think again, that's the problem. And I feel like a stick in the mud here, but I think that's the problem, that these are very generic concepts, right? Like membership is the name of the proposal itself, or it's how it's been referred to generically. So it makes sense to make sure we're talking about that. We shouldn't have to say, well, let's read the membership proposal and then we'll know what a membership is. And then we'll like that feels very generic. Similarly with entitlements, this is the list of things that you can do and the price that you will pay for it. So this is very, very high level kind of concern. And again, I just think the fact that we jumped to E3 and then we look at something saying including entitlement pricing and open data feeds, which is specifically about discounted rates. It feels like, well, this is something that should be possible to get right without going into the details of it, because it's a fairly high level concept. And I know that it's hard because that means we all talk about it in different ways, but I don't think it's the case that if we go through all of the detail, that will emerge at a clearer understanding of what an entitlement is, because in fact, it's a very central concept to the whole kind of universe of transactions that we're talking about. And I'm happy to go with entitlements, but I think there is some confusion evident in the document itself when it says, here's how we include entitlement pricing. And it's clearly referring to, just these bits here. And the question is really, well, how do we refer to it if we also are considering that price there? What's that slightly more generic word?
So I guess I'm not. Yeah. So okay, sounds good. So it sounds.
Sorry, are we just going in circles here?
If we're resolving the cross purposes of this by talking about it now without getting into the detail, if that's what we need to do, I do think we're talking about slightly cross purposes across the offers, the different offers available, those that imply discounts and not, and what an entitlement is. And I feel like the circle might be that there's a how does an offer fit with an entitlement? But then it's like, is that an entitlement? I wonder whether is it just defining what an offer is and what an entitlement is?
In simple terms, the entitlement, or whatever you want to call it, is what they are signing up to or what they're agreeing to as part of this journey. At the end result within the offer block is if you like, is the level of price and the entitlement that they get. There's two parts to it. There's what you're claiming to be to the price that you end up with, and you could call it any name you like, entitlement, package, whichever. It means different to other people, but I understand from a standards perspective is an agreed terminology. But leisure industry might be one thing. In other industries, depending where this goes, it could be a completely different phrasing again. I mean, we talked about claims. I don't think that would go down too well in an insurance company and an insurance industry and that sort of thing. That means something completely entirely different. So I think the concern we've got here is we're talking around it a lot. I think we just got to agree, if we can at a high level, a user takes out call it entitlement, takes out a package, a entitlement, whatever you want to call it. They've signed up to something. At the end result, they'll get an entitlement that carries a price.
I think it could even go one step more generic than that. I think what we're talking about here is essentially authentication between systems and or identity between systems. Is how does system A tell system B that the identity of the person who is authenticated is X, and X can be anything, and it might differ between all of the systems in terms of
I know from our system, and we're having to do a form of mapping. So whatever the agreed terminology that's coming in from, let's say it's Manchester, or whether it's coming from Westminster, they'll have different terminology.
Exactly.
There's a mapping that goes on, and then that mapping that then interfaces with our booking system, actually it's our membership system, if you want to be technical, that then steers the level of pricing. So it's the mapping exercise that needs to take place.
Exactly, and the mapping,
that's the bit.
Yeah, and that's the thing that then entitles you to a specific offer, is the fact that you've got this identity, and then the booking system or membership system can identify that particular person by virtue of some facet that's passed across there. And then, okay, because we know they're this person, we know that within Legend they have a Legend member, whatever the heck it's called in Legend, doesn't matter. In sports it's called a discount, whatever, it doesn't matter what it's called. And therefore they are eligible for this offer. And so entitlement, membership, package, those are all booking system words for them to use however they want. In terms of a spec here, it's identity and the associated authentication as well, I think.
Well, I think going back to the sort of original documentation question, and I feel like, yeah, I think people have restated Rob's original point, where in a way, it's not like we're going to find the one true term that works for everybody, and that it is about mapping. But I think really when we talk about entitlements and subscriptions, it is that there's that sort of two-part process that when you go to buy a membership, you assume that with that membership, you're getting some set of X's. I don't think most people would describe that as a set of entitlements, but it's some set of access rights that you're getting, or a package of access rights, as you will. And I think that's a useful high-level concept to be able to refer to, because it's fairly intuitive. And I think even developers coming to the document would be like, okay, well, whatever background I'm coming from, this will always be a domain object. This set of membership benefits, package of benefits, whatever that you get when you join, is the thing that needs to be referred to in a clear way. There's obviously more detailed questions about identification and how you get lined up with a particular discount. And that's ultimately what the point of that concept is to funnel you into that more specific allocation. But it's really just a documentation question about what's the most generic word that doesn't carry very specific connotations. And I'm only making a point of entitlement because originally I was thinking that it was just unique to my head, but in fact, looking in the document, if we use entitlement at some points to refer to some specific kind of special class of things to which you might be given access, but that many users will have only generic access, and that there's a membership package that encompasses that kind of generic access as well. I think it would be useful to have a higher level term.
Benefit? Is that what you're saying? It sounds like,
or maybe membership benefit or something like that, to keep it, clunky but clear.
There's a lot of implications, I think, with all of those words, because I don't think it's necessarily anything to do with membership. A membership is difficult in itself because membership implies subscriptions or monthly, all sorts. So we probably want to steer away from the term membership generally, and I guess potentially then benefit could work, but then I guess the question about benefit is it implies a positive benefit rather than a disbenefit, and not all of these entitlements are going to be a positive thing necessarily, or whatever they're called.
Right.
It does sound like
not entitled to a discount. Yeah.
Right. It does sound like it's not a package, though, from what you've just said, because I think it kind of came out in the way that you were phrasing it, that it's a package of entitlements or a package of subscriptions. That it's not itself a package, because a package sounds like kind of container. So maybe that's a good way of ruling out that option, and maybe we put benefits in as another option in there. I don't know if there's any others that we could use. If it's just,
I mean, the concept itself is the eligibility for a particular offer. Is that what we're trying to name here?
No, it's the assertion by the broker to the booking system that a person is entitled to or allowed to access certain things.
That they're eligible for a particular offer.
Well, it's not just that they're eligible, I suppose, it's that they will receive it, right? It is the benefit that they receive, I suppose.
It feels like we're just talking about a security model, isn't it? Do you have the rights or privilege to this thing? Yes, you do. No, you don't. That's all we're really doing here, isn't it? I've got a person. Do they have the right to this thing? Yes, they do. No, they don't. What that thing is, we don't really care.
That's my understanding. If you want to take it to its most abstract and generic level, that's my understanding of it as well, Wayne.
I think what Nick just said about this being the broker making assertions is a really important point in this, because I think where this has been tripped up is that when we've been having a more abstract conversation about this with people who aren't working on, aren't developers on this stuff, they're thinking in terms of the part of this we talked about of it being, you as an individual, I have this because of my postcode or whatever. That's entirely outside of the scope of the system. What we're talking about here are the ways in which computers talk about this, and it's saying one computer saying this user, this session, this entity has this property, and you can only ever know that. Yeah, as I said, it's a security model. We're not talking about how you verify that, but you're asserting that it's true, and it's up for grabs how you assert that or whether you trust it. But it's what we're modeling is that assertion rather than the thing that sits outside of it in society. And that could be some useful framing of this. And especially that could be one of the things we highlight in the interface between this call and the Wednesday call, is that we're not talking about modeling these things at a societal level. In other standards I work on, we may well be doing that. And the term eligibility has meaning in open referral world, and that's a significant thing there. But it's what we're talking about here is down the detail of how to model the assertion that a person has a thing or that a user has a thing. But yeah, we're not even talking about people, actually, aren't we? We're talking about OpenID instances. What's the word in OpenID? It's not even an instance, is it?
User, I think.
Yeah.
The customer accounts here, though. I mean, that's the idea of, if we've agreed a customer account is not a person, a customer account could be the same person could have multiple customer accounts. The customer account is asserted with, yeah.
Well, I feel like then we get back to the idea of membership, because actually what it is this customer account sits within this particular class or is associated with this particular class. And there's a limited number of those, like security groups. There's a limited number of groups that you might be a member of. And it's about lining you up with what those possible groupings are.
My concern is that we might be getting a bit abstract here. Security groups and things like that. Because these things exist for other reasons. And we might in the future be talking about groups for dependents, about, you know, the kind of WhatsApp group type. Your kids are part of a group with you and you can book on behalf of them, and there's a group there, and that's a group that you're all members of. And I don't, yeah, I guess I don't know whether we need to be a bit more, in order to have this conversation properly. I wonder if we need to think about each of the places where we would want to talk about, like, what entitlement, because entitlement isn't, well, or maybe, as you say, there's like a broad term for stuff that could be associated from a security point of view that we can start to use in these conversations. And then there's a narrow thing, which is the entitlement or whatever that you can specifically apply that has this kind of implication around it. I don't know if, this is what I was saying before about that coming clear as we go through, not as we go through the spec necessarily, but just as we go through the process of thinking about the different places in which this broader or narrower sense of a thing could be used, that we might then come to the conclusion that's obviously one of these or the other. But I think everything we have arrived at so far is only, it works in an abstract sense, but because we haven't all gone through the problem set space yet. And I guess if this set of calls is a tour of the problem space, if you like, forgetting that there's obviously already some proposed solution on the table that we're going to be going through as part of that. But when we finish the tour of the problem space, we're probably going to be much more equipped to name things within the problem space with that all in mind. I just don't see how we, because anything otherwise will be almost jumping to a conclusion that might not then fit later with something that will come across and go, actually, no, that was too broad. That doesn't actually make sense. Yeah. That's
something of a problem that there is a proposed solution on the table, because I don't think it's possible to remove that proposed solution from your brain after having read all the appendices. So that, you know, but there's no way around that. There is a proposed solution on the table, but it's important, I think, to try and remove that from the conversation when defined, unless well, no, I think it is important to try and remove that from the conversation, though it may end up meaning that model turns out to not be correct. It could turn out to be completely correct, but if we are actually going to do this properly, not properly, you know, there is a danger that the proposed solution will not match the model that we come up with at the end.
I mean, I think my concern is more, yeah, I think it's maybe just having the conversation was worth it. My worry is that we've actually already had some conversations using the language of entitlements. And then somebody else chips in and says, oh, that's a subscription in my system. And then we'll have a little bit of a side chat about where entitlements and subscriptions differ. And, you know, so it does feel like a live problem. And I feel like maybe we can resign ourselves to that and just say, okay, when we say entitlements, we're just going to have to define that up front in the document and say that's specifically what we mean by this, and just resign ourselves to that. I was hoping to find a solution there, and I think yeah, I think there's a kind of inertia that you get once there is a solution on the table, and it gets tricky because I think there are systems that use entitlement already, and I suppose it's going to be hard to avoid connotations sneaking in.
Do we just need some really tangible alternatives? I mean, it's a good conversation to be wrong, and I agree, Matt, what you're saying about we need to not be just going with what's there because it's there. Completely agree in terms of the solution. It's really a straw man, you know, to help us accelerate the conversation. But I wonder whether this is a very hard problem we're trying to solve. Obviously, hardest problem in computer science, to come up with a name. Maybe we just need to go away and think about some alternatives to what's in there at the moment, and as a straw man, and if we come back and then we can look at each of those in the problem space, we can all, from our different views of the problem space, kind of challenge, not based on the solution, just based on the problem set, whether that's going to cover it.
Based on my understanding, you're saying that, I mean, part of the problem with entitlements is that it's not necessarily always a benefit, or it's not always a positive, which I guess is the problem with benefit as well. And when people were talking about security, the security system I use uses a concept of stamps. So, I mean, it's just throwing another word down, but it is helpful because it's not necessarily used anywhere, but because we don't want to use property, even though it is essentially just a property of a customer, that they have these, well, these things. So, but property obviously has its own connotation. So we need something that's similar to property.
I mean, my feeling is that it's actually membership category is what we're talking about, that there's a set number of these things. Oh, no, big shake of the head from Nick Evans.
We can't use membership. That's the, sorry, I know I keep saying that, but membership really does have lots of implications. And I know one of the very early calls with requirements, the focus was, this is not membership. We're not solving membership. Sorry, we said that earlier, but that was my...
Right, okay, so the word category wasn't a problem, although I feel it's a bit like property. It's like everything's a category. But it's really what group the user sits in is really what this is capturing. And it's
use role.
Ooh, role. Ooh, another
loaded term.
Unixy.
Nathan, what does a stamp mean? A stamp is like you have this particular, it's like the stamp as in a rubber stamp. You have this rubber stamp as having this particular property or feature, or
yeah, so it's property or features. So essentially with user authentication in this security system is you have a user passport, and then the passport contains stamps, and then they can be a load of different things.
Right.
So it can be like, this user has this role, or this user like is able to do such and such an action.
I was under the impression that claim was more broadly used than just in a .NET world, but is that not the case?
No, claim is part of the OpenID Connect and OAuth specs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I'm still thinking that these things are claims. The fact that you have a particular membership is a claim. The fact that you're under 18 is a claim. The fact that you're in this postcode is a claim.
So Matt, maybe I wasn't clear. I think I completely agree they are claims. It's just they're a type of claim, and the type is the thing we need to model rather than the claim. It's like everything. But
I don't think there is a word for all of those types of claims. Like the fact that you're under 18 doesn't, you're not in a membership because you're under 18.
Sorry, what I specifically mean is in OpenID, there's a list of claims in the spec. They include name,
email address, whatever. Yeah. Right.
And so they're all claims. And so the fact that this package entitlement thing is one of those is definitely that. I completely agree. Like there's a name claim, an email claim, an address claim, an entitlement claim. That I guess it is a claim, but I'm not following is a name claim, an email address claim, and a claim claim. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, but it's not. I don't think it's a membership claim. It would be a MCR active discount owing to being in a postcode X claim. Like I don't think there will be a separate claim for each membership type. Again, to use the word membership when I don't really mean to, but it's not that there's like one claim which is going to encapsulate all the types of membership that you can have. Each type of membership will be a claim which could then entitle you to a specific offer.
But when we talk about claims in an identity sense, we're talking about claims related to the identity, related to the customer account.
Yes.
So are we saying there's a different type of claim that's not that claim that we're going to use to mean something different? So just so I'm understanding.
A different type of so an identity would have a name claim, the first name claim, a last name claim, email address claim, date of birth potentially claim, postcode claim, legend membership 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 claim, specific claim for each specific membership type, etc. so they're all namespaced, aren't they? And that's how you define them, and as a consequence, we have full control over what the claim ID is. In the same way as you've got the identity of each of the facility uses, each of the slots, etc. We're at liberty to have our own namespace identifier for each claim. So I'm not sure that it's necessary to have a claim which encapsulates all of the membership types. Each membership type is a claim in and of itself.
We do need a plural term to have an array of these things when we talk about it, though, presumably.
But they're just separate claims. You have lots of these claims. You have, you have legend membership 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 claim and legend membership 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 claim.
So I'm following, but is the purpose of this conversation to come up with a generic name for the thing so we can talk about it throughout the spec? In which case, if the answer to that question is we're not going to have a name.
But that's my point, though. I don't think there needs to be a name, because the name of the thing isn't important. What's important is the eligibility for a particular offer.
So I think I'm going to move that we take this into another venue, I think, because this is a useful conversation. And I think it's been conceptually interesting. Like, yeah, maybe there is no generic concept. Although I think communicatively, even then we'd have to say we don't have a generic concept, because it's a kind of business entity. What would be the best way to pick up on this? Because I think this is useful to have. But yeah, I think we all need to think about it as Nick did suggest. Is Slack a happy medium for people here?
Yeah, I think so.
Is that okay? Okay. I will kick off that conversation, and hopefully we can come to some kind of resolution, if simply through exhaustion at some point. So the last point is actually, I hope is easier to resolve, because I think a lot of it is just my own ignorance. We talk at various points in the document about barcodes and access mechanisms and so on and so forth. And I, for one, became quite confused in one of the calls, because it seemed like at some points we were talking about barcodes, and other times we weren't talking about barcodes, and then swipe cards entered into it. And then there was some kind of unified representation for both those access mechanisms. And I am afraid, as somebody who's not familiar with the domain, I was very confused as to what we were actually talking about in the end. So is it useful just to say generically access mechanisms is what we talk about in this document, in the proposal, and we just leave it at that? Or are there distinctions to be drawn between different kinds of access mechanisms that need to be referred to?
Might be a good one for Andy or Wayne to pick up on, because they obviously have access control as a part of their systems.
Yeah, and there's a range of different methods to get through. So I say barcode, QR code, RFID, biometric. It's an identifier against a membership record within the booking system.
Yeah, I suppose for us, for all of us, is that I think at the moment all that's being passed through as part of the proposal is an identifier as attributed to a member's record or to a contact record. I think then it's a case of what type of medium, and I'm assuming if it's a barcode, it's a printed card that they're going to be given or picked up. I mean, if we talk about Everyone Active as an example, it's not an Everyone Active card, it's an MCR card. It's owned by MCR or it's owned by Westminster. So there's a mechanism with regard to how they get that card. But then the barcode that's on that card, it's how is it being printed? I mean, again, as Wayne's saying there, it could be a QR code that's got a member ID or an identifier in it. So therefore, there's a discussion between the seller, if you like, and the broker that needs to take place to understand that medium that card is going to come in on and how it's printed. Is the equipment in place at the moment, or is it a purchase order that needs to be sourced to be able to accommodate that type of card? Or is it that the seller should actually be trying to influence potentially to the broker that maybe it should be Y type of card or barcode?
I don't think we should be
I don't think we should be referring to cards at all, if I'm honest, just because we're, as a business, we're trying to get rid of them. We're trying to put things in the app, in the phone, probably on emails, QR codes for booking confirmations on emails, and just trying to do away with the physical card. So I'd be really reluctant to mention anything specific to cards. It's all about what is the individual going to use to access the building. Does that I know that, does that make sense? Like if you're a guest, if you're doing a guest checkout, and so we don't have an associated record for you, you're not going to have anything physical. We won't have given you anything physical because we don't know who you are. Therefore, there's a requirement that the email confirmation you receive has got a barcode on it that can be used to gain access to the facilities for that activity. We're not physically issuing you a card because we don't know who you are.
Agree. So and as I understand it, Nick, it's the broker's responsibility to do all the forms of confirmation and so on. So I don't know whether it's in the scope. I haven't seen it, but in the scope or anything at all, that is that accommodated within the scope and the spec that the broker will be providing a barcode of some sort.
I wonder whether, and I can't remember if it was Andy Wayne or Debbie that just said it then. Someone said something about identifier, and actually we're just passing around identifiers. I wonder whether if we removed, because I think as Wayne was saying, there's biometrics, there's all sorts that could be used to get to that. And all we're really saying here is the broker has an identifier for the user that they recognize, and they're then setting that identifier in the booking system. So I wonder whether, because we're really not talking about we are talking about a barcode number because that's the field it goes into in the booking system currently, but I don't know if it's too specific to be using that terminology. Maybe we just need to say identifier or something.
Well, I know there's a card number of some sort, or there's an identifier that's been passed into the system as part of the integration, but I think the bit that's missing, as Debbie's saying there, what is it they're going to use to gain access into the building and prove they have a booking? Is it that identifier, as maybe we've perceived? Or is there another method that maybe that the broker hasn't captured yet, that maybe they should be using? As an example, maybe a booking reference that ties into a booking. And that's specific, obviously, the phrasing that I'm using in our system. But Legend, I'm sure, will have something else that maybe is tied down to a particular booking.
So it's worth saying
I think we're already passing the reference through, and that was going to be converted as a barcode or a QR code. Am I wrong, Nick? Tell me if I'm wrong, but that was my understanding from my conversations a while ago.
So the booking spec does already include barcodes for the guests. So we might be able to scope this conversation not to the guest situation, but just to the members or the whatever they're called, customer accounts.
Mm-hmm.
Because a customer, there is a slight difference as well, because a guest could get an email with a QR code on or a barcode on, and that has to be rendered. Whereas I guess the identifier for the customer account, or the barcode or the QR code for the customer account, is slightly different because it sits in a type of, like, not membership card, because as Debbie says, that's not really real, is it? But virtual or otherwise, some way of some shared access control mechanism that the broker can. But the other thing about this is the broker is actually the one in many of these scenarios that's issuing those cards, because this card or virtual card or whatever it is being used across a number of different systems.
I mean, if we were to go down the route that any bookings that are made via this solution, somebody gets an email with a QR code on it, and that's what's used for access, then cards don't even need to exist, or it's not a need. There's no need for them, because we only want somebody to gain access at the time of their booking, and that's what that QR code should do. It's different to our members, our paying direct debit or annual members that are allowed access whenever they want. Then they do need something physical, like something on their phone or a card that's going to let them in at any time. But when you're associating it directly to a booking and their entry time is restricted to that booking, a card is really not necessary.
Completely agree. I think potentially the complication here is that entitlements, or whatever we call them, can entitle customer to free swimming.
Some of them will, but it doesn't mean that they can just, in the case of Manchester Active, that's specific, but it doesn't mean they can just let themselves through the turnstiles necessarily with that card.
So this is one for Westminster and Manchester as examples of the brokers to think about. But I from there, we've recently had conversations where the give that card that you can just use without the turnstiles, especially for kids or older people that may not know.
I think a lot of that's changed during lockdown for us specifically, because we've actually moved to bookings for everything and anything that we possibly can. So we're still encouraging, and we don't foresee it being removed, the booking of your activities, regardless of whether they're free or not. So there's still a requirement, even if you get something for free, for you to book it. And the entry is based on you having that booking. Does that make sense?
Totally does. I wonder whether the thing to do is to surface this on the Wednesday call. Because that sounds like a requirements question, doesn't it?
I think the challenge, I don't know if everybody agrees, but the access mechanism, to me, the challenge is whether you've got a physical barcode reader on the entry points that person needs to go through, which will read whatever format it is that you're putting out that barcode in. So if you're putting it out in a QR code, does the reader that's on the turnstile actually read QR codes? Because they don't all read QR codes. Does the reader on that turnstile read from a phone very well? Because they don't all read from phone screens very well. It's more about that'd be more about the physical. Does what we've got work with what we're gonna have to use it for? Does that make sense? Because I know we're having to go through the process of changing a lot of our readers on our turnstiles, because they're not they don't work across all types.
So the requirements as they stand, although I guess maybe there's a conversation on Wednesday about whether they stay the same or not. There's two things. There's the need to surface QR code or barcode in emails as a result of guest bookings, as kind of tickets, if you like, ticket barcodes. And then there's the membership number, or whatever we want to call it, like the identifier of the customer account that is used by the broker and asserted on the accounts of the various booking systems. So
I think that's just a link between the two records in the two systems. But in essence, whether it's a guest or whether it's a member, they could use the same form of barcode, QR code that's on their receipt, if you like, to gain access.
So I don't know how we proceed with this conversation without covering the requirements, because I know that if you had Westminster and they would get very animated about the need to have kids without barcodes, and it sounds like a good problem to have that conversation. So I don't know if we can move. Either we have to assume the requirements as they are and have the conversation about the solutions. Do you know what I mean? Or we talk about changing the requirements, in which case we should probably do that on Wednesday.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think Wednesday is the venue for that. I guess in terms of nomenclature in the documentation itself, actually it feels like everybody knows what access mechanisms are. It's just which examples of access mechanisms are relevant. That's the requirements question. So I think actually in terms of the proposal, it's easy enough to say access mechanisms, where we say barcode or QR code or whatever, we just replace that with access mechanism. At some point in the document at the top, there's definitions, access mechanism may include, and the contents of that gets fleshed out on Wednesday's call, really. But it sounds like at least this access mechanism is a term everybody understands, and it's pretty unambiguous, although it might have a wider or narrower list associated with it.
I would actually read access mechanisms as the mechanism of access rather than the code or the specific.
Okay.
I'm not sure if that was what was intended.
Yeah, no, I was thinking, whatever whatever gets rendered by the broker to admit the person was what I was attempting to capture there.
That's currently called access pass in the booking spec.
Right. Okay. Damn. Okay. Well, there is reference to access mechanisms, which I guess I took to be a reference to the access pass. Okay. I guess, unfortunately, I'll say that that's another issue for the Slack channel then, although I'm guessing Access Pass will be less contentious than entitlements, and probably be, yeah, it seems like there's requirements to flesh out, but at least how that's referred to, I guess, is probably slightly clearer, despite my own confusion on that point. Okay, so I think the actions from the call are amend the document so that customer account gets used in reference to the booking system, and reword anything to do with membership or customer account on the broker to segment that off and indicate that it's essentially out of scope for the document itself, although the customer model is useful. And then to hash out entitlements a little bit more on Slack, and also come to a consensus on access pass and access mechanisms, with requirements being discussed on the next W3C call. Is that a fair summary? And thank you very much for that. I actually thought that was quite useful conceptually. Anyway, I realized there was a lot of, it was sort of inconclusive in terms of the actual words used, but I thought actually in terms of unpicking some of the assumptions underneath the document, that was quite helpful. So thank you very much for your participation there, and catch you either next week or the week after that.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay. Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks all. Bye.